On this edition of the UFO Book Library, a walk on the wilder side of ufology with one of Wendell Stevens' classic books. The book we're cataloguing today sits in one of the most unusual and controversial corners of UFO literature. Most UFO books fall into a familiar category: sightings, crash retrievals, military encounters, or abduction testimony. But this title belongs to a very different shelf, the shelf that deals with ongoing contact. The book is UFO Contact from Reticulum, Updated, written by Wendelle C. Stevens. As the title suggests, this is not simply a report of a single encounter or a one-off incident. It's the continuation of a story, an attempt to document further developments in a contact narrative associated with the constellation of Reticulum. Within UFO lore, Reticulum is often linked to the star system Zeta Reticuli, which has become one of the most frequently referenced extraterrestrial locations in UFO contactee literature. When readers encounter the word Reticulum in the UFO title, it signals immediately that the book is entering the tradition of star system contact narratives, a tradition that sits in the intersection of testimony, mythology, and high strangeness. In practical terms, this is a collector-style UFO book. It was primarily issued in physical print formats, most commonly paperback with some variations in hardback, depending on the print run. Digital editions are relatively uncommon for books from this era of UFO publishing, and audiobooks are essentially non-existent. As a result, the physical copy is what most collectors seek out. Like many of Stevens' work, the book feels less like a polished commercial publication and more like a compiled case file, a document intended to preserve a narrative rather than to shape it into conventional narrative structure. Wendell C. Stevens occupies a unique place in UFO research publishing. A retired United States Air Force officer, Stevens became widely known in UFO circles as an investigator, compiler, and publisher of complex or controversial UFO cases. Over the decades, he produced numerous books documenting alleged encounters, abductions, crash events, and contact narratives. Stevens' style was rarely that of a conventional storyteller. Instead, the books often read like archives, collections of testimony, documents, correspondence, and case materials gathered together to preserve the details of unusual claims. For this reason, Stevens became associated with what might be called the deep case tradition of UFO literature. Rather than presenting simplified summaries of incidents, he frequently allowed witnesses to speak at length and presented large volumes of supporting material. This approach meant that some of his books became essentially references within the UFO research community, while others were criticized for relying heavily on testimony that was difficult to independently verify. Regardless of where one stands on the credibility of the individual cases he documented, Stevens played a significant role in preserving many narratives that might otherwise have disappeared from the historical record. The central subject of UFO Contact from Reticulum Update is the continuation of a contact narrative linked to the constellation Reticulum. At the center of the case is Bill Herman, a South Carolina diesel technician whose alleged contact experiences began in late 1977, aged 30. Herman claimed repeated encounters with beings from Reticulum over several years and produced numerous photographs of the objects he said were visiting him. It was those photographs, together with the consistency of his testimony, that convinced Wendell Stevens this was a case worthy of detailed investigation. In UFO culture, Reticulum is closely associated with the star system Zeta Reticuli, which has become famous largely due to its appearance in the story of Betty and Barney Hill. In that case, Betty Hill described being shown a star map during the alleged abduction experience, and later interpretations suggested that that map corresponded to the Zeta Reticuli system. Now, whether one accepts the interpretation or not, the the association between extraterrestrial visitors and Zeta Reticuli became deeply embedded in UFO folklore. Stevens's book enters that tradition by documenting a narrative in which contact experiences are associated with beings supposedly originating from that region of space. What makes this book distinctive is that it presents itself as an update, meaning that it follows an earlier narrative and adds additional developments, testimony, and documentation to an ongoing story. That framing changes the nature of the book. Instead of describing a single dramatic event, the book suggests an ongoing relationship between an experiencer and non-human entities. In UFO research, such claims are among the most debated and controversial. They imply that encounters with non-human intelligences may not be isolated incidents, but part of a continuing interaction over time. As with many of Stevens's works, the material in this book relies heavily on witness testimony and narrative accounts rather than independently verifiable physical evidence. The information presented includes descriptions of encounters, communications, and interpretations of beings involved in the alleged contact. Readers encounter discussions of star origins, descriptions of extraterrestrial visitors, and explanations offered by the experiencer about the purpose or meaning of the contact events. From a strictly scientific perspective, this type of material is extremely difficult to verify. There are rarely radar records, photographs, or physical artifacts associated with such claims. Instead, the value of the data lies in its documentation of the experiencer narrative itself. In that sense, the book functions less as proof of extraterrestrial visitation and more as a preserved case of study in the contactee tradition. For researchers interested in the cultural and psychological dimensions of UFO experiences, such narratives are valuable because they show how individuals interpret encounters with the unknown. The real value of a book like UFO Contact from Reticulum Update lies in its position within the broader ecosystem of UFO literature. UFO books are not a single genre, they're a collection of overlapping categories. There are government disclosure books, crash retrieval investigations, pilot sightings reports, abduction testimonies, and contactee narratives. Each category reflects a different way that the UFO phenomenon has been interpreted over time. Contact narratives form a smaller but highly influential branch of that ecosystem. These stories often shape the mythology of UFO culture, introducing recurring motifs such as specific alien races, star systems of origin, or messages delivered to human witnesses. Whether one believes these stories literally, symbolically, or psychologically, they contribute to the evolving narrative framework through which UFO experiences are discussed. For a library that aims to catalogue UFO literature comprehensively, books like this are essential because they document one of the most persistent strands of UFO storytelling: the idea that contact may involve communication, relationships, and ongoing interactions rather than isolated sightings. What separates this book from many other UFO titles is its focus on continuity. Most UFO books describe a single event, a crash, an encounter, or an abduction. In contrast, this book suggests a sequence of experiences that unfold over time. The use of the word update in the title reinforces that structure. The narrative is not closed, it evolves as new experiences or interpretations are added. Another distinctive element is the explicit reference to a star system. Many UFO accounts describe unknown craft or entities without specifying where they might originate. Contactee literature often does the opposite. It introduces specific astronomical locations, Reticulum, Orion, the Pleiades, creating a cosmic geography that gives the narrative a sense of place. For believers, that specificity can feel persuasive, suggesting that the visitors come from an identifiable location in space. For skeptics, it raises the possibility that the stories are influenced by earlier UFO narratives that introduced those same locations. The most striking aspect of books like this is not necessarily the claims themselves, but what those claims reveal about the evolution of UFO mythology. Over the decades, contact narratives have gradually built a shared symbolic framework. Certain star systems appear repeatedly. certain types of beings become recognizable archetypes, certain themes, warnings about humanity's future, explanations of cosmic history, or discussions of human potential recur across multiple accounts. This pattern raises important questions. Are these similarities evidence that witnesses are describing encounters with a genuine external intelligence? Or are they examples of narrative contamination, where later experiences absorb elements from earlier stories? Stephen's book sits there right in the middle of that debate. It preserves a narrative that contributes to the mythology of UFO contact while leaving the reader to decide how literally the claims should be interpreted. Now, from a collector's perspective, Wendell Stephen's books occupy an interesting niche in UFO publishing. Many were printed in relatively small quantities and circulated primarily within the UFO research community. As a result, certain titles can become difficult to find over time. UFO Contact from Reticulum Update is especially appealing to collectors who specialize in contactee literature or who attempt to assemble a comprehensive Stephen's bibliography. Condition matters significantly when purchasing these books. Copies were often produced using modest publishing resources, which means bindings can be fragile and paper quality may vary. Clean covers, intact spines, and unmarked interior pages increase collector value. Early printings are usually the most desirable, and sets of related Stephen's titles can command higher prices when sold together. Within the UFO Book Library scoring system, UFO Contact from Reticulum Update receives a score of 7 out of 10. It earns strong points for its rarity, its connection to Wendell Stephen's body of work, and its role within the contactee tradition of UFO literature. The fact that it functions as an update volume also adds historical interest, because it suggests a continuing narrative rather than a single documented event. However, the book loses points in terms of evidentiary strength. The material relies heavily on testimony and interpretation rather than independently verifiable data. For readers seeking hard physical evidence of extraterrestrial visitation, this category of UFO book will likely feel speculative. For readers interested in the mythology and narrative evolution of UFO encounters, it remains a fascinating and valuable addition to the library. And now into the rabbit hole. And before we continue into further reading on this subject, it's worth telling you if you'd like a deeper dive into this particular book, Chris Ramsey at the excellent Area 52 podcast has done an absolutely astounding deep dive into this particular book. This book opens the door to several related strands of UFO research. One path leads deeper into the writings of Wendell Stevens himself, including other case-driven titles that explore unusual encounters and abduction narratives. Another path leads into the broader contactee tradition that began in the 1950s, with figures such as George Adamski and continued through later authors who claimed ongoing communication with extraterrestrial beings. The Reticulum reference also connects the book to the long-standing fascination with Zeta Reticuli within UFO lore. Readers interested in exploring that thread may find themselves revisiting Betty and Barney Hill's case, as well as later discussions of star maps and extraterrestrial origins proposed by various researchers. Finally, this search naturally leads towards interpretive frameworks developed by authors such as Jacques Vallée and John Keel, who argued that the UFO phenomenon may not fit neatly into the extraterrestrial hypothesis at all. Their work invites readers to consider alternative explanations involving folklore, consciousness, and the deeper mysteries of human perception. UFO Contact at Reticulum Update represents a classic example of the contact narrative tradition in UFO literature. It's not a crash investigation, and it's not a military encounter report. Instead, it documents a claim of ongoing interaction between humans and non-human intelligences associated with a specific star system. Whether one views such narratives as literal accounts, symbolic experiences, or evolving mythology, they occupy an important place in the history of UFO research. As part of a serious UFO library, this book helps illustrate the diversity of the field. UFO literature is not a single category of investigation, but a constellation of different approaches to understanding the unknown. Wendell Stevens' work reminds us that some of the most enduring UFO stories are not about sightings at all, but about relationships, narratives in which the phenomenon appears to engage directly with human witnesses over extended periods of time. And that makes this book an intriguing and worthy entry into the catalogue of the UFO Book Library. Now, if you've read this book, leave your thoughts and your score in the comments below. And if you're an author who's written a book on any aspect of the UFO phenomenon and you'd like to submit a copy to the library for consideration to be featured on the show, you'll find links in the description below. And as always, let me know in the comments below which title you'd like to see pulled from the shelf next. Now get the full story. Buy this book on Amazon via our easy links in the description. If you enjoyed this episode on Alien Contact, we recommend this video. Or for a deeper dive, why not check out more books in our Contactee books playlist. Please support the channel by simply subscribing, sharing and liking our videos to help us so we can bring you more.